Just on the use of electronic devices, just to advise members, devices should be put on mute by pressing FN and F8 keys.
Right.
Screens can be viewed by the cameras in the room. Devices should only be used for committee business during the meeting. When members refer to a specific page number in the pack, they should refer to the page number at the top of the page. When the submission has been numbered by the witness, the member should also refer to this to avoid confusing the witness. So I just ask the committee and anyone in the public gallery to ensure that all other electronic devices are switched off. And also invite members to declare any interests which are relevant to the issues being discussed at today's meeting. And ask members if anyone is aware of any apologies.
Samuel Olsen.
Thank you. No other apologies. Moving on to the draft minutes. Draft minutes for 26th of March are page 5 of members' meeting packs. Just ask members if you're content with the minutes from the 26th of March as drafted.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to chairperson's business. Wish to advise members received requests from the Chief Executive of the Social Security Agency to postpone today's briefing on the welfare reform communication and engagement strategy. A letter from the Chief Executive can be found on page 3 of members' tabled items folder.
When are they hoping to come, Chair? After discussions on the reform are concluded. Okay.
How long is that piece of string?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to hold their breath for that particular one.
At least not after the 7th of May, anyway.
That's a very cynical view, but
Yep.
nevertheless, they're probably not the only one. Just to inform the committee, over the Easter recess period, the chairman attended an event as chairperson of the Committee on Homelessness. The event was organised by participation in the practice of rights. Matters arising, there's none, unless somebody else has any matters arising to raise. And next on the agenda is the regeneration bill. It's a departmental briefing. The following departmental officials are here to brief the committee on the issues raised by stakeholders and some members on the regeneration bill. Henry McCarter, Ken Snowden, Anthony McDade and Peter Turner. I think you're here almost as often as we are. So I just advise you to come forward. Also, I wish to advise members the committee has received a late submission from Belfast City Council. A copy of this submission is on page 59 of your meeting packs. Due to the lateness of this submission, the Department has not had the opportunity to address the specific issues. However, the Department had advised that most of the issues have been raised by other stakeholders and addressed in Annex 2 of its briefing paper. I refer members to the Department's paper on page 13 to your meeting packs. Just invite the officials to brief the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thanks for the opportunity to respond to the evidence provided to the committee over the last number of weeks on the regeneration bill. Officials from the department attended all of the evidence sessions, and we've considered all the points raised in the written submissions and also orally. We've provided the committee with some detailed responses to the individual points raised. I think it's clear to say that there are a number of recurring issues and a number of key points which have been raised in the evidence and also at the committee. So with your agreement, Chair, I would like to maybe run briefly through those. The issues, key issues raised were why there's no definition of social need in the bill. Leading on from that, do we need a catch-all clause in the bill as currently drafted? The issue of retention of powers by the Department in relation to development schemes which are of significance to the whole or substantial part of Northern Ireland. The requirements for councils to seek departmental approval if they're going to adopt a development scheme or going to vest property. Why community development is not referred specifically in the bill. The role of the Department post-2016 in monitoring performance against programmes, and the ring fencing of CIF and other budgets. So I'll just briefly go through those issues. The reason why social need is not defined in the legislation. Social need is a term which is used to capture a wide range of societal issues and problems being experienced by the population. Different needs in relation to employment, education, housing, health or environment are experienced by individual groups and areas. And our understanding of social need can change over time. For example, the impact of migration into Northern Ireland and the needs of migrant communities only emerged as significant issues over the last 15 years. In addition, the most appropriate means of judging or measuring social need will depend upon the issue being addressed or the service to be delivered by a particular government department. For example, a measurement used in education could relate to attainment levels or the number in receipt of free school meals, while in economic development, economic inactivity or unemployment figures may be the relevant measurements. So given the fluid nature of social needs, the Department considers that a definition wouldn't be helpful in legislation. In fact, we've checked, and the term social need is used in a number of statutes, both in Westminster and Northern Ireland, without definition for that reason. Now, over the last number of years, DSD have used multiple deprivation indicators as measurements in support of its neighbourhood renewal programme. But from 2016, councils will be able to identify which social needs within their districts are the most of most priority, and the measurement tools they wish to adopt. Leading on from that, then, there's the issue of, we have in clause 1, I think it is, clause 1.2 of the draft bill allows financial assistance to be provided for anything not falling within paragraph A to E, which council considers will benefit the district. And this has been described as a catch-all clause. And it's very wide-reaching and has been used very flexibly by the department over the years. Some concern has been raised about this, and some suggestion that the bill should be recast to specify those things which should be supported. And what we're saying in response to that is that the whole purpose of local government reform and the conferral of a number of these powers on councils is to allow decisions on key local issues to be made locally. So we've not sought to be definitive in the bill as to what constitutes regeneration or social need, as this will differ for different councils in different circumstances and at different times. To rigidly define the type of regeneration activity that councils can take forward would inevitably constrain councils in taking decisions regarding improvements that are needed in their particular areas. Just that we look through the statistics on the types of things which have been supported under the social need order, and they range from education and health initiatives, drug awareness, crime prevention, youth projects, victim support groups, community development, public realm schemes, private sector developments, ethnic minority support projects, single parent family support, the list goes on. So if we list everything in the bill, it won't be an exhaustive list. But if we don't allow councils to make up their own mind about what is the priority need for their area, the whole idea of transferring this responsibility to councils will be null and void. So we think that would be totally contrary to the spirit of local government reform. In relation to the retention of powers by the Department to allow it to carry out development schemes which are considered to be of significance to the whole or substantial part of Northern Ireland, this sort of mirrors an approach which has been taken by DOE in relation to planning, where they have reserved the power for the DOE to handle planning applications which are considered of regional significance. But there are clearly defined rules about what is regional significant in those circumstances. But there seems to be some confusion here over what a development scheme actually is. A development scheme is a statutory amendment to the area plan. It is part of the planning process, which allows the Department and the Council from 2016 to identify an area which requires significant regeneration and to draw up a comprehensive development scheme to tackle those issues. A development scheme is not necessarily a regeneration scheme, and vice versa. There's lots of regeneration schemes which don't need the use of development powers, which is a specific power. To put this all into context, over the last 10 years, the Department has pulled together one major comprehensive development scheme, and that's Victoria Square. So this isn't something that happens on a daily or yearly basis, and may not happen in some councils at all. The next issue is the requirement for councils to come to the Department for approval for the adoption of development schemes investing. And leading on from the last point, what we're saying here is the vast majority of regeneration work which the Department currently carries out, and which councils will be undertaken from 2016, doesn't require the use of development scheme powers or vesting powers. But we feel that come 2016, in circumstances where a council feels that it needs to use those powers, they are significant powers, they're wide-ranging powers, and we think that it is appropriate for the Department to have some oversight over those. In relation to the role of the Department in monitoring programmes being taken forward by councils, the Regeneration Bill confers powers on councils to enable them to take forward regeneration and community development. It doesn't transfer programmes to councils. It will be up to councils to determine how they take forward the use of these new powers. So as such, it is not intended that the Department will have a formal role in monitoring the council's delivery of their own programmes effectively. But what we are saying is that the Department will be issuing guidance and has issued some guidance already in relation to the carrying out of these responsibilities. And the DOE bill, local government bill, provides a range of powers for departments to intervene if we consider that councils aren't properly carrying out their responsibilities. There was an issue raised in relation to community development and why it's not specifically mentioned in the bill. Going back to the first point about listing everything that can be covered by the social need order, we didn't feel it was necessary to include community development, but it is, the power is in there in the social need powers which have been transferred over to councils. So it would be under the catch-all clause. Now, if the committee felt that we needed to specifically mention community development in that clause, well, we could certainly look at that. But there was a reference there in one of the responses that not only should we mention community development, but we should also describe in the bill how council should go about that. We don't feel that that's a role for the legislation. And the last point is in relation to the ring fencing of budgets, and the specific issue mentioned at the last meeting was the CIF budget, which is a budget of 2 million. But other budgets have been mentioned in the past, that why do we not ring fence neighbourhood renewal budget, whatever. I think the issue here is if the Department will require the councils to deliver particular programmes such as community development, community investment, neighbourhood renewal in defined ways, or to ring fence budgets, the purpose of transfer would be seriously undermined. The whole purpose of this is to give these responsibilities over the council. They know what their priorities are and they know how much money they should be spending on each of these, and it will be up to them to take it forward in that context. Also within the wider context of the planning responsibility which we will have from 2016. Okay, Mr. Chair.
Henry, thank you for that. Okay, Jim Allister.
Yeah, the communication, which also contained the points you made this morning of the 3rd of April to us, is that simply a departmental official's response, or is there a ministerial input into that?
Ministerial endorsement to that.
And it's signed off by the minister? Coming to this point about clause 1 and your desire to clutch to this catch-all addition to it. If clause 1 in paragraph 2 says that the council can do anything not falling within paragraphs A to E, which the council considers will benefit the district, what's the purpose of A to E?
It's just to highlight the type of activities that can be done.
It's incidental.
Yeah.
Like you're writing into this that the council can do anything.
Yeah.
So why trouble yourself with A to E?
Well, I suppose to give a flavour to the type of activity that.
Yes, but you're not saying that the catch-all clause is limited in its interpretation by virtue of what's in A to E. Are you?
No.
Sir, generous. This is, you're not saying that.
No.
So really, clause 2 could obliterate A to E and be of exactly the same effect. So it's just
Well, I
knowledge.
think the purpose was to demonstrate the type of things which typically would have been under this. But over the years, the social needs order has been used very widely and very extensively and very successfully in the Neighbourhood Renewal Programme to extend its usage. So those were examples of the type of
Examples, but they don't restrict.
They don't restrict.
And the catch-all, in fact, supersedes the examples to the point where you can do anything. I can understand maybe a department wanting to keep all its options open, be able to do anything on a province-wide basis. But is there not absolute folly in going down the road of giving to 11 different councils 11 different perceptions of what they want to do in terms of being able to do anything? You're not going to get such a patchwork of different approaches that is going to be held up to ridicule, that you can get support for something in one council, but you can't get it in another.
Well, again, that's the whole purpose of local government reform. The executive has decided that councils are best placed to decide on these matters. We're conferring powers to do that, and we're conferring the exact same powers that we have used in the past, in consultation and in cooperation and in partnership with councils. The councils have been involved in this process all along, so why should they suddenly go off on different tangents?
Well, because hitherto they've only been acting as your agents, and now they've got the steering wheel. They can take this where they want to take it, and they might take it in 11 different directions.
Well, they might, but that's the prerogative. That's what we're saying is that
You think that's good?
up to now, the department has decided where the priorities lay, and in future, councils, in the wider context of community planning, will be able to determine their priorities for their area and determine which uses they will be making these powers.
Just to flesh that out a little more, that means, for example, that one council might decide, well, we're going to decide what social need is by applying the Noble indices. And another might decide, no, we're not. We're going to decide it by some other criteria. So again, you can have a range of contradictory approaches as to what is social need right across different parts of Northern Ireland. You think that's sensible?
Well, there are different interpretations of social need at the minute. So
No. Take neighbourhood renewal. It's governed by the Noble indices.
Yes.
I said principles, indices.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
That's in my mind for another reason. Sorry about that. But what you're now talking about is that councils could go off in all these contradictory directions, really with a blank cheque to spend the money on whatever they want, in whatever manner they want, with no restraint that regeneration is at all tightly defined as being economic or anything else. It's just whatever you think. You think that's sensible?
Well, it's the approach that the executive has decided. The executive has decided that councils will have responsibility for these matters in the future. The executive has decided that councils will be able to determine their priorities for their area. And within that broad context, we are conferring powers on councils to take forward work for free generation in their areas. It will be a matter for them to decide. And I know that some councils have already decided to go along the neighbourhood renewal approach, certainly from the first, but it may well be that the neighbourhood renewal approach is not suitable for other areas, and they may determine a different way. But it's up to them to justify that they're elected, how they're delivering this responsibility which has been conferred.
So at the end of all of this, one particular council, for its own particular reasons, could decide we're going to funnel an inordinate amount of regeneration money into some pet scheme that we're attracted to, because this legislation allows us to spend it on whatever we like.
The legislation is...
That's just a matter to shrug your shoulders at.
Not,
So what?
Not necessarily, but as I go back to the point, the executive has decided this. It has decided that this responsibility will go to councils. The powers are wide-ranging. The powers have been used very flexibly by the department in the past, in cooperation and in partnership with councils, and, you know, has it been unsuccessful?
I think there's a big difference between a centralised department having flexibility in its approach to a free-for-all across 11 councils. It's absolute folly. Thank you.
Okay, Fran McCann.
Sure, to be brief and with some sympathy for some of the points that Jim has raised, and especially on the noble indices, that it's near enough been a guide on how you deal with social need and deprivation over many years. And I have been a bit concerned that 11 councils could run it, how you deal with social need and deprivation and social community development in 11 different ways. Now I know that each council may have projects or programmes that they believe may fit into that. But and it's not only recently, but I've always been concerned that there's never been a proper definition of social need, and there's never really been a proper definition of what community development is. Was I think council has a completely different definition from what the department has built up over long many years, and probably cold-faced work through necessity. So I would be concerned at that. The question that I would like to ask is, if in terms of any council, if they are not seen to be spending the money in terms of dealing with deprivation, dealing with social need, or taking it in another direction, has the department the power to come in and advise the council that they may be going down the wrong road?
Well, there are powers in the Local Government Act for departments to intervene in circumstances where they feel that things aren't going right. They're pretty wide-ranging powers, but you know, we're starting off on the basis that councils will take this on in good spirit and deliver regeneration and community development in the way that it was intended. But there are call-in powers. There are powers for the department to ask council to draw up reports, whatever. But I think sort of we're jumping ahead here and assuming that this is going to be a failure. I think we have to give councils a chance and give them some credit that they're going to do this right. Bearing in mind, they will have to develop a community plan. Part of that community plan will have to reflect regeneration. It'll have to reflect community development. It'll have to reflect tackling deprivation. It'll have to reflect the priorities for that area. And it'll be for councils then to determine how they do that and what priority to give to certain things.
But in some councils you may find, and I understand what you're saying, that it's a new proposition, councils dealing with all this, and it'll take a while for it to settle in. I would have thought that given the long experience that there are within the department, especially DSD, of dealing with these issues, that there would have been a connection there just to ensure that people would get angling. And notice Ian there, because Ian would know what I'm talking about in terms of community development, that there has been a concern there across all councils that the definition that council have of community development does not necessarily fit into the definition that DSD would have had and have built up over a long many a year of hard practice and hard work within local communities. And it's just that if that is taken away from it, then it will not only have an impact on dealing with deprivation or social need, but move away from that well-worn, practiced position of what most people believe community development is.
Well, yes, the department has the power to issue guidance to the councils, and the councils will be obliged to have regard to that guidance when it's issued. So the key piece of guidance will be the Urban Regeneration and Community Development Policy Framework, which was published in 2013. Yeah. That will be the key piece of strategic guidance that will be issued by the department. Now, we are also intending to follow that up with best practice guidance, I suppose, to advise councils on our experience of what's worked well and what's been effective, and potential pitfalls and lessons that they would need to take account of whenever they're designing their own schemes and programmes if they want to do something which would diverge from what the department has undertaken in the past. And that would be on the basis of things like the evaluation of the neighbourhood renewal programme or the urban development grant scheme.
Thank you, Roy, and then Dolores.
Again, thanks for your presentation. Like others, I have a degree of concern that paragraph 1 could be just, or section 2, or even just the whole paragraph could be written. Financial assistance may be provided for anything which the council considers will benefit the district. I mean, it could literally be provided for anything. There's would appear to be no restrictions in that. Can you tell us how wide-ranging the current powers are? You've indicated there's great diversity at present. Just what is the extent of the range of outside the normal neighbourhood renewal or areas of deprivation or small pockets of deprivation funding? Just what other types of activities has the money currently been used for?
Okay, this provision, what is now Article 1 in the bill, is in the social needs order. It's used to support environmental improvement and public realm schemes, urban development grant funding for projects, and then also in the past it's supported or allowed the development of a number of schemes, like for example the CRISP projects, the old SARE scheme, which is a community economic regeneration scheme, what used to be called the Londonderry Regeneration Initiative, and Making Belfast Work, and then laterally in the past 10 years or so it's the Neighbourhood Renewal Programme and Areas at Risk schemes. So the kinds of projects that we've funded over that period of time have ranged, if you want to go in alphabetical order, I suppose, from adult education classes right the way through to youth clubs and youth projects, and a very wide range of things in between, covering a range of kind of mostly health and educational and crime prevention or crime-related activities, and community development. So there are different models about how you approach this, and one model would be that we support community development workers in areas, and their job is to develop schemes and programmes which will meet the needs of those particular locations, and then they go and source funding from other places to deliver those. That might be a health project or a youth project or whatever that would be. And a different approach to it, taken in some of the smaller towns, is to look at actual programmes that might be delivered through health trusts or education library boards. So there are about 360 projects under neighbourhood renewal we're funding at the minute, covering a whole spectrum of different things.
Okay. And you've indicated that the protection you would see that would exist would come under local government powers of the Minister to intervene if you think something inappropriate action is happening. Would you accept that would be very controversial if that did happen?
It would be the kind of power that you would hope would never have to be used. Okay. And yes, it would be quite a significant step to have to take before you get to that point.
Would you also accept that there is potential of adverse effect in community relations if a controlling group on a council decided to use this money for anything which it believed was going to be beneficial to the area, which could be very controversial and adversely affect community relations?
I think that, like every other public authority, the new councils are covered by the Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act, so they will have to take account of that, have to have due regard for that. And whatever they do will need to be within the framework of the existing law around that kind of equality and good relations activity. So no public authority is unfettered discretion to do absolutely anything that they wish. It's not to say that lots of things aren't controversial, but there's a framework within which they have to operate.
In the absence of I believe the Code of Conduct has not been adopted from memory, which would have given a degree of protection with the need for qualified majority voting. In the absence of it, have you considered actually introducing a qualified majority voting clause to ensure that the funding would not be adversely used in a controversial fashion?
No. I think you'd want to be careful against making an assumption that would never be agreed by the. Would you also
agree that it might be difficult if you assume that it will be agreed and it never be agreed, and that there is potentially unfettered use of public funding by small majorities on councils?
But I suppose hard cases make bad law, and we wouldn't want to get in a situation where we're trying to deal with that now in the particular circumstances.
Would you not be
actually
better
create-
dealing with it now and then it's dealt with, and if there's a code of conduct, that protection will be doubly reinforced?
There is a distinct risk of actually having duplicated provisions in different laws and perhaps confusion and conflict between them, and it'd be something you have to take extreme care in drafting and doing.
I agree entirely, but there is no current regulation on this. So would you at least consider, you think it'd be appropriate at least to consider that in order that controversial decisions will not be used, that ratepayers' money will not be significant amounts raised and used for controversial projects which could adversely affect community relations and potentially require ministerial involvement, again adversely affecting local government relationships? Would it not be better to have a safe...
Who's to determine whether it's a controversial decision or not?
Well, if there were a qualified majority voting requirement, it would ensure there would be widespread consensus in an
You're
area.
saying you should have that provision for every project, every programme that's delivered by councils under this provision? Like Ian talked about 360 projects, so each one of those will have to go through a process of voting?
Sorry, just to be clear, the code of conduct was to apply to local government decisions.
Yes.
This will be local government decisions.
Yeah.
So if the code of conduct were in place, this would be covered by it and that protection would exist. So this would be covered by it if the code of conduct were in place.
Well, since you've raised the issue, I think we'll have to go back and consult with the Office of the Legislative Council and take their counsel on that particular point and see if it's possible or desirable to consider that and look at it now in the context of the whole framework of local government reform legislation.
In the absence of some critical parts of it.
Okay, Roy, thank you. Dolores?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Just a couple of points I want to pick up on in relation to urban renewal and neighbourhood regeneration. You're talking primarily, obviously, some of the powers being transferred are centred in the urban districts, and I do appreciate that there is a crossover between DARD and particularly a lot of our rural villages which have lost out over a number of years now on the CRISP programme. But I just wonder what consultation, if any, has there been with your colleagues in DARD in relation to ensuring that our rural areas can benefit from some of the regeneration powers in terms of the budget and the powers around, some of the Living Over the Shops initiative, around the shop frontages schemes or the environmental improvements?
Okay, just to be clear, the legislation and the regeneration bill will allow the councils to operate throughout their entire district. Okay, the restriction that the department has operated under a number of years actually relates not to the underlying legislation which has been transposed into the regeneration bill, but in fact the legislation which creates the department, which specifies our function as being urban regeneration, as distinct from rural development, which is DARD's responsibility. And therefore that's what creates the necessity for us to operate within our remit, which is urban areas. So the new councils will have the ability to operate in any part of their district in any size of settlement and deliver the kinds of schemes which you mentioned yourself and which we have done in the past. We have been in contact with DARD in relation to the development of the legislation and also the community or urban regeneration and community development framework. And also in relation to some of the issues that have been raised during the call for evidence as well.
Chair, can I ask further to that? Given that the budget that the department would have the ability to transfer with the power, is that budget then ring-fenced for the urban regeneration, or are we going to be able to say to local councils, here's money for regeneration? So it's going to be spread a bit thinner, if you like. They'll have the power but not the budget, or will they then have to look to DARD for the budget to deliver some of the regeneration projects or European funding in rural areas?
They'll be able to apply the budget to wherever they want to apply it to. That's a decision to be taken by the members themselves in each new council. DARD's rural development programme is funded by European structural funds by and large, so it's not something which they are at liberty to delegate or devolve to local government in the same way that we are with our budgets. You're quite right that it will mean that if a council decides to lower the threshold for what's an urban settlement, then they will have to spread their money further and across a larger number of settlements. But we can only disperse the money that we actually have, and so we're limited to dispersing our own urban regeneration budget.
And I note that areas at risk are still defined beneficiary, if you like, within the scheme. How are those areas defined then? Because it was something that was cobbled together a few years ago very swiftly, and I thought it was time limited.
They are areas which are in the 11 to 20% band of most disadvantaged super output areas in Northern Ireland, or the communities which are identified around those. And yes, it is a time-limited initiative. Each area was to get 2 years of support to try to address potential decline in those areas. And the Minister has taken a decision to extend at a reduced level of support funding for some of those areas during the last year of our activity. So whereas an area may have received about £60,000 perhaps last year, this year they'll get about £30,000 or thereabouts.
Okay, and just one final question, Chair. And it's not so much to do with the bill, but in terms of the staffing resource, once the bill is enacted, from the departmental perspective, what plans are there then in terms of moving resources, including staff, to district councils, or if any?
Okay, I'll maybe have to go back to the beginning of explaining how this works. Because we are conferring the powers in the council as opposed to transferring a function, the TUPE regulations don't apply to the staff currently engaged in this activity in the department. So we have agreed an arrangement with the councils that they will advise us of the number of staff that they actually require, they expect to require to deliver the function and activity under the new dispensation, and then they will let us know how many people they want, and then we will offer those opportunities around amongst the current staff that are there, and hopefully fill all the requirements that way. Now, at this point, we expect that not all of the currently employed staff in the development offices will be transferring to council under that particular arrangement. So the rest of the staff will effectively become surplus and be redeployed in other parts of the civil service.
Chair, perhaps we could see what the business case or the plans are in relation to that. I'd be interested to, how the scheme's going to work out. Not right away, but over time.
Well, no, the details of the scheme have already been worked up and they've been forwarded to the council, so we can provide that to the committee if they'd be interested.
I think that'd be useful, Chair.
Thank you for that. Okay, a couple of points maybe, just to kind of recap a wee bit, because I think on the last point that Dolores has raised there, really, because we've raised this before at previous sessions with ourselves in terms of, but what you're actually saying is that the rural end of things, the DARD funds, for example, are mostly ESF, isn't that right? Or they can't be transferred, is that right?
They're European funds, so that they wouldn't necessarily be ESF. They're probably, if it's still called the same thing as the European Agricultural Guidance and Guarantee Fund.
I thought, in your own paper it says, unlike the DSD programme, DARD Rural Development Programmes funded by European Structural Funds.
You're thinking of the European Social Fund, that's CSF. Structural funds is a generic term for all. So, but the protection, I suppose, around that would be, clearly if DARD cannot transfer that over, but within the community planning process, then clearly DARD has to be a key component of that. So as that all has to be taken into account. There does need to be a joining up, of course, so that they're not just running two parallel processes, possible duplication, or just wouldn't make sense. Okay. Come back to the previous issue was raised by a number of members around the whole question of monitoring and what would require to be monitored. So if what we're saying is we're trying to leave transferring the function over local government, we're not going to tell them how to do it. What your paper tells us is that in paragraph 2 is that you don't intend to monitor, but ultimately the department has the power to require reports and so on and so forth. But at what point would you might want to require a report? We're not going to monitor. Just want to...
sorry, and just before you come in, I do understand that you have made the points earlier on, you have made it previously, that powers have been transferred. On the face of it, people can more or less do as they choose and council area by council area. But that is all still within a framework of local government powers, the equality legislation, community planning provisions, call-in measures, the council having to have due regard to guidelines and so on and so forth. So there is a framework there. I'm not so sure that I have to say this respectfully, I don't think you acquitted yourself very well in the earlier part of the session and outlining that. There is a framework, it really isn't just council can do whatever they like. I think there's more protection than that. It may not be enough, and I would have concerns around that myself. So could you maybe just elaborate on that a wee bit again, because I think it was left a bit early on that more or less councils can more or less do whatever they wish, and I don't think anybody would want that. And I'm not so sure, even within the provision that you have, even if they don't go far enough, I don't think there is just as fair as it might have appeared earlier.
Yeah, the response was it was drafted in the context of the kinds of comments we made during the evidence sessions, which were effectively suggesting we needed to monitor the activity of the councils, and so in other words, how they are carrying out their functions and how they spend their money and so forth. And if we get into that, it does raise the question of why do you bother transferring the responsibility of the powers at all? So we're not proposing to have any kind of activity monitoring. We'll be checking or auditing what the councils get up to. However, we are looking at putting into place some kind of framework to monitor outcomes that the councils achieve and deliver, so that we will be able to then monitor how things are progressing in town centres or in disadvantaged areas. And the use of the oversight powers would have to be related to what kind of outcomes are being achieved by council. So if a local authority is completely failing to address any of the kinds of issues that are emerging in their particular area, and the outcomes are showing a downward trend against what we would expect, that's when you might want to look at whether you need to step in or to offer advice or guidance or support or assistance.
Okay. Okay, there's no other members indicating to speak, so could I then, if you're happy enough, and to leave it at that for this morning? Are you happy enough? Okay. Henry, thanks very much again, yourself and Anthony and Peter. Okay, thank you. And members, just to follow on from that then, in tab 1 there of the bill folder there, you'll have a timetable. Really just immediately in terms of our next steps in the context of the forthcoming election. As you know, there'll be no plenaries. It's been agreed at the Business Committee that there'll be no plenaries on that week. And I'm presuming that people wouldn't have an appetite for committee meetings either on that basis. And obviously our committee is on a Thursday, so I presume nobody's anxious to...
I think you've 6 candidates, haven't you?
Probably the most candidate-heavy committee.
All right, so look forward to some change, perhaps. I don't know. Wish everybody well in that spirit. So, in terms of because we have a deadline, if you like, to complete our business. So, just in terms of the.
What's your current extension? When does it?
It's the 28th of May.
20th of May. We can't seek another extension because although we did say initially that we wanted to not even use the maximum time available because we wanted to turn the bill around, and you can't go and seek another extension in the minute because we're outside of the 30-day period. So we have the date there. So maybe if Kevin outline the weeks that we have, because what we need to do obviously is to have our own discussion now on the basis of what we've heard so far, and we've got a late submission from the council, I think Belfast City Council, is it? Belfast City. So we need time to consider all of the evidence that we've heard, so we need a meeting to discuss all of that, and then obviously then to get reports brought back to the committee from the clerks for approval. So this timeline.
Roger, you just given on the basis of the time frame outlined there in tab 1, you can see that we have a final clause by clause
For the 7th of May. So obviously, if members are not going to meet that week, as is the case, then we have to obviously address that meeting for a start. But that would be maybe an additional meeting during one of the following weeks, either next week or the week after. But the approach would be an informal discussion of the committee, the issues raised by stakeholders and the committee, with the department, and maybe in more detail, clause by clause, so an informal clause by clause. If there's any further issues to be resolved, there'll be intention that the department be able to address those at that session. if the committee intends to bring forward any amendments, of course, we can, they would have to provide it to the department as well, to get the minister's response prior to the committee moving on to the final clause by clause run through, Chair. So the issues that will hold up are the meeting on the 7th, which has to be factored in, and any additional communications between the committee and the department on any specific issues, particularly if there are going to be amendments coming from the committee, so that the department has time to respond.
So if we work through on the 23rd and the 30th, then by the 30th we'll know whether or not we need to have an additional meeting, isn't that right?
That's correct. Although, Chair, that would you coming really down to the wire then in terms of how we'll be working on a draft report in any case, but on the basis that trying to avoid any last minute hold-ups, you know, it may be best having an additional meeting earlier within that time frame, either next week or the week after.
Beyond the 23rd.
What does it actually mean, department's final position to committee issues and suggested amendments? The 23rd of April.
That's if the, for example, in relation to, I think it was the qualified, Mr. Beggs raised in relation to qualified majority voting, and they said they would consult with OLC in this. So if they consult with OLC in that matter, and the department come back and says, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to move on that, then you know what, then you're in the position now, then at that point, where the committee decides, well, what action are we going to take on foot of that response? So it's really, if the committee isn't happy with the fact that there's no definitive, there's clear definition of social need, then the committee may want to take a position on that. If there's any, and make amendments subsequently. So it's really to get the department's formal response on any of the issues that the committee decides are its key points that one wishes to make.
Could we then consider then, we have a meeting then scheduled obviously for the 23rd of April. Could we then pencil in a meeting on the Tuesday before the 30th of April? What's that, the 28th, isn't that right? Could we pencil that in now? If members are agreed, it would be a single item agenda, given it's a plenary day. But it might allow us to go through the informal clause by clause.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair. And at that point, it would be a case of the committee really determining if there are changes to be made, in particular, if there are changes to be made, what those changes are, so that the department can either take those away and address them, possibly for the Thursday meeting, if not for next week, for the week after. For the week after. So
and would those have to be changes that the committee collectively was asking for?
Well, that would depend on whether everyone was in favour. It's like anything. Like if a member comes with any member obviously can come with a proposed amendment and present it to the committee. The committee can discuss it, and if they're in agreement, then it'll go to the department. So. And
you anticipate that should be done on that special meeting on the 28th?
Well, yeah, right.
On the
20th proposed meeting on the
20.
The proposed additional meeting on the 20th.
So if one had amendments, that's the meeting you bring them to, is it?
Well, actually, next week, I think we're looking at the additional meeting for next week, are we, Chair?
28th. It'll be
20th. Okay, 28th.
So we will go ahead as planned on next Thursday, the 23rd, isn't that right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Clearly, if anybody had any amendments in mind,
yes,
then if we could bring them to that, it would be helpful.
Yes.
But at the very least, to feel safe where they intend to build in is that we're going to have a special meeting on the 28th, which at worst we might want to table. If anybody wants to bring an amendment to the committee, then we'll do it on that day as well. I'm just concerned about the short, it's only a couple of days turnaround then to the 30th. But if you're happy enough, you can facilitate that.
We can facilitate that. The only concern is whether the department will be able to have the necessary discussions with the minister in relation to amendments to get a response back in time. That's the difficulty.
And then the final clause by clause would be the 14th, is that right?
Yes.
Pushing that back a week.
And if we could actually alert the department that, you know, over that couple of days there may be, and it's because of the suspension of business around the election week. So, because if we didn't have that for the 7th of May meeting, then we wouldn't have this problem. That's when we're all affected by it.
Everyone's affected, yes.
Yeah. So we just alert the department to that, a bit of a hiccup in the process. So as we can they'll have a quick turnaround if needs be. So is that, are members happy enough for that, then we proceed on that basis? Okay, thanks for that. Okay, members, then moving on then to the next item then, which is, just get this. Statutory rules. Okay, members, so statutory rule, just run through them then. First one's SR 184. It's on page 69 of your pack. If members have no objections to the rule, then I'll read on the record. Members content? Okay, that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 184 2015 Social Security, members of the Reserve Forces, amendments, regulations, Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the examiner of statutory rules report recommended that it be confirmed by Assembly. Agreed? SR 185, again, that's on page 84 of your pack. Members with no objection, I'll read on the record. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 185 2015, the Employment and Support Allowance, repeat assessments and pending the awards, amendment, regulation, Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the examiner of statutory rules report has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Thank you. SR 211, page 96 of your pack. No objections, I'll read on the record. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 211 2015, Social Security, Maternity Allowance, Earnings, Amendment, Regulations, Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the examiner of statutory rules report has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Right.
SR 204 on page 5 of your tabled items folder. Have members with no objections to the rules to be made. I read into it backward. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 2015. The Registered Rents Increase Order Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the examiner of statutory rules report has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Thank you. Okay. I just want to advise then members that the Department has provided the Committee with copies of 2 SRs made by the Secretary of State on Social Security matters. These rules are not subject to Assembly procedure. The Department has also provided notification of a commencement order relating to the Pensions Act 2012, which also does not require Assembly procedure. A copy of these can be found on pages 105, 119 and 122 of your meeting pack. Okay, just members just required to note that. Okay, thank you. Moving on to correspondence. If you just draw your attention to page 130 of the meeting pack, the Department has provided members here with a written briefing on the outcome of the consultation on the Equality Impact Assessment to accompany the proposed pension schemes bill. Subject to ministerial and executive approval, it's envisaged that the Department will brief the Committee on the pension schemes bill on the 7th of May, and that'll obviously have to slip date-wise. Okay. So just to take, if we're able to reschedule then that to an oral briefing on the outcome of the consultation prior to committee stage, and the potential date for that briefing is now 30th of April. Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay. On page 162 of your meeting packet, the Department has provided the Committee with a copy of their business plan 2015 to 16. The plan highlights the priorities and challenges for 2015 to 16 and sets out the Department's targets and commitments for the year.
Sorry, Chair, can I just noticed it's actually page 130, and it's the business plan.
Okay. Instead of 162.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, members, apologies for that. Okay. Members content to schedule a briefing from the Department on the business plan? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, and then just members content then to note the correspondence as per the memo on page 128. Okay, thank you for that. The forward work programme, next item, page 197. Members content to note that? Thank you. Any other business from members? No other business for record. Thank you. Then we're now move into closed session to consider the report of the Fire it. Yes. Okay, we're now.
Item 29.